Okay, so welcome everybody to this roundtable discussion meeting today on marine conservation and restoration for a sustainable ocean. This is our fourth and final roundtable discussion in a series that we've been running as part of our Turning the Tide Systems Thinking for a Sustainable Ocean project. And it's being held today to wrap up the final theme of our project, which has focused on marine conservation and restoration. So we're really pleased to have gathered a fantastic group of experts in this topic area today, who are going to be diving into some of the key opportunities and challenges that we face when it comes to marine conservation and restoration work. Chairing today's discussion, we have award-winning marine and coastal specialist, Emily Cunningham, who's driving positive change for our ocean through her extensive advocacy work. So a big welcome to Emily and all of today's speakers. And with that, I'll hand over to you now, Emily.
Thank you, Jo. It's a pleasure to be chairing this session today on marine conservation and restoration for a sustainable ocean. When I started my career over a decade ago, we talked almost purely of marine conservation. But in recent years, and quite rightly, restoration has become its bedfellow. And so I'm pleased today that our session is going to consider both marine conservation and restoration. And we'll talk a lot, I'm sure, about where the line lies between the two. And I'm looking forward to hearing the insights of the respected experts joining us today. And we'll start with some introductions. So if Ben, you'd like to introduce yourself first, tell us where you're from, what you do, and we'll go around.
Okay. Hi there, yeah, I'm Ben Green. I am an estuaries and coastal specialist at the Environment Agency. I lead on our restoration work in the Environment Agency and the project called Rememory, or Restoring Meadows, Marsh and Reef, and also our blue carbon work.
Thank you, Ben. David, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Emily, and hi, everybody. So my name is David Tudor. I'm the Programme Director at the Blue Marine Foundation, which is a marine conservation charity, as well as Director of Ocean and Coastal Futures, who have worked alongside the Institution of Environmental Sciences on this Turning the Tide series.
Thank you. And Diana?
Hello, my name is Diana, and I'm the Director of Dialogue Matters. I've got a background in integrated marine management going back about 25 years, which is what transitioned me from linear thinking to more integrated thinking and now systems thinking, and I design and facilitate dialogue and negotiations about marine climate, nature, rivers, all sorts.
Thank you. And Joanna?
Hi, morning. Morning, everyone. Hi, Emily. Good to see you again. Joanna Post. I am currently Chief of Section at the UNESCO-IOC in Ocean Observations and Services. And previously, I was Science and Policy Head and Science Policy Ocean Coordinator at the UNFCCC in Bonn.
So hi everyone, my name is Kelly. I'm a marine environmental consultant / scientist. I kind of dabble in both. I work for a company called BMT, and we're kind of a sort of science, engineering, technology sort of firm. And yeah, I'm doing a lot of work at the moment in blue carbon, as well as climate risk and resilience work. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant.
So I'm Mike Allen. I am a professor at Exeter University. I've been a marine biotechnologist for about 20 years. I also co-founded and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of Seaweed Generation, which is a sort of automated robotics company looking to unleash the power of the ocean through robots and monitoring and sort of automation, really, and sort of revolutionize the industry is our bold vision. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you all. Wonderful to have such diverse kind of backgrounds and areas of focus that we can draw on today. So I thought I'd start us off with a big picture question. Why is what we all do, why is it crucial for achieving a sustainable future? So why is marine conservation and restoration crucial for a sustainable future? And I'll open it out to the floor if anybody would like to start us off with that not so insignificant question.
Let's start,
Yeah.
Emily. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably obvious to us around the table here, but I think, conservation of the marine environment is obviously critical. Why is it critical? Well, the ocean is our climate regulator. It provides food, wave attenuation, for flood prevention. You've got native oysters clean the water, they build reefs, the well-being of people. So it's critical for all of humankind and Earthkind and the world, really, that we have a sustainable future for our ocean. Because essentially, if we continue to denude habitats, species, then the whole balance of the planet comes under threat, really. And as we've already just touched on, the blue carbon habitats are critical for climate regulations, fisheries, for food. So yeah, it's so many reasons why marine conservation and restoration is crucial, really, for a sustainable future.
Thank you. And kind of building on that, do you think that is widely understood? Obviously we do this as our job, like you said, David, but outside of our bubble, do you think that people understand how crucial protecting our ocean is for a sustainable future?
I think increasingly so, but the simple answer to your question is no. I think the vast majority of the population of this planet don't realize it. I mean, you've obviously got coastal communities who depend upon it, and particularly in the global south. But equally, the mass of urban populations, or even urban places near the coast, don't often realize the importance of the ocean, really. And I think that building that, what's often called ocean literacy, is just critical, really, for building capacity around people's knowledge around how the coast and oceans can be managed.
Leaving that open, does anybody else have thoughts on or anything to add to what David's already said?
Yeah, I think I have. So of course, I absolutely agree that marine and coastal are absolutely vital. Even we're talking deeper marine than the focus of much human attention, which is sort of much more inshore. But there's sort of scope for marine energies, and I don't know, whales doing a great job of looking up carbon, and we need more whales, and all sorts of things like that. So of course, I just would wonder about the extent to which citizens broadly need to know the interdependencies with marine. So bear with me, but there's some research that shows that awareness of climate change is ramping up incredibly. It's about the 85% mark of citizens now concerned about climate change and wanting action on climate change. The ability to shift behaviours towards climate change is flatlining, and has done for quite some years. So the assumption that awareness leads to action, it's not that linear, it's not that straightforward. There's yeah, so that was sort of answering some of the second part of what you asked about the extent of people needing to know and understand. And even if they do know and understand, they're fettered in their choices about whether they know what action to take, whether they can take action, whether it be a priority for them in the context of poverty or other things, other crises that people are dealing with, and the extent that does or doesn't, like I think we can assume knowledge equals concern equals action equals resources for marine management and a change in political view, and I'm not sure that those assumptions are at all how it quite works.
If I may add, and I think it's I'm not sure what you actually mean by people, but just coming from the political side, from the UNFCCC negotiations, and the essentially having led the introduction of the ocean agenda under the UNFCCC, I think there is now a much greater understanding at the government and intergovernmental level about how important ocean and ocean action is. That's clear, and that's been recognized. I think there's a huge question about how best to do it. Speaking from climate change, it's well recognized by governments now that we need to integrate mitigation adaptation into coastal ecosystems, into policies and management practices at national and regional levels. from a climate change perspective, that includes internationally determined contributions, international adaptation plans, and that's vital for as a government priority for mobilizing finance. Having said that, you know, some countries are much more aware of that, and those are probably the most vulnerable ones compared to others. And there needs to be much more understanding of how to strengthen the blue carbon accounting methodologies, being aware that blue carbon is not a solution for mitigation. So it's a solution for a huge range of resilience, and I think that the coastal zones are going to be the melting pot for impacts on climate that's going to spread inland. You know, you're going to have the impacts coming from the coast, they're going to hit land. I think someone mentioned, you know, that people are not as aware of what needs to be done in the coast as on land, and I think that's very true, and there needs to be some involvement of how to sustainably manage coastal ecosystems, and build this recognition at all levels, local, national, international, and look at these direct benefits. So I think the awareness is now there, but I think the how to really needs to be evolved a little bit more at every level.
Thank you. That leads me very well onto my next question, which is, what are the main barriers to marine conservation and restoration? So we've talked a little bit about how that awareness is growing across society, but what is the thing that's stopping us going from awareness to action? And if anybody wants to leap in.
Oh, sorry, David, you go.
Thanks, Kelly. I mean, we just talked about a little bit there on lack of knowledge, which to a degree I think is a barrier. But I agree with this. In the previous statements, is not the only barrier, and it's certainly not an excuse almost not to act. I mean, there's so many barriers really. I mean, cost is an obvious one when it comes to restoration in particular. I think the cost of whether it's equipment, whether it's people's time, whether it's technology, I think is a key thing. I think there's also an element of inertia. I think sometimes, and I mean inertia amongst governments, individuals, communities, industry, sometimes not knowing what to do or not knowing how to do it, or also not caring, of course. So I think there's a big element of inertia there sometimes. Obviously, as we all know, the ocean is out of sight, and I think that is a key thing sometimes, is the people don't really know about it. Therefore, just being out of sight doesn't help. There's the whole tragedy of the commons issue here, you know, where it's everybody's but it's nobody's, the management of it. So I think there's numerous barriers, and then of course you overlay that with licensing and policy and regulation that is sometimes very helpful and sometimes not. You know, the barriers go on and on really.
Thank you, David. I'll hand to Ben, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm very much for looking at what happens in England as the remit of the Environment Agency, and we're looking at particularly focusing on restoration. Our kind of two bits of feedback that we get from where we work quite closely with the NGOs on the ground, trying to develop more restoration work going forward. As obviously is comments, as Dave mentioned, about regulatory regime and how that can be seen as a barrier to restoration. And we're looking at ways to try and resolve that through the licensing process. And then we kind of step back and say, actually, if we want restoration to be one of the key methods of trying to enhance or improve our seas, our coasts, we're looking at the scaling up potential, and at the moment that is probably one of the big barriers to trying to grow seagrass, native oyster restoration in particular, on a large scale. We don't have the infrastructure, particularly around the aquaculture facilities in this country, to deliver large scale seagrass restoration, oyster restoration with the spat, with the seedlings, with the seed provision that you need to actually deliver hectares and hectares of restoration of these key habitats. And these habitats are really, they're quite slow to regenerate naturally, so that's why we're looking for active intervention to restore them. And there are a couple of places. I believe I think the Orkneys or the Shetlands, there is a oyster hatchery now dedicated to providing spats purely for restoration. But really we need to kind of focus on trying to grow national facilities for aquaculture specifically for restoration projects at a large scale, and looking at ways of actually long-term funding to support these.
I've got something I'd like to say in relation to barriers, which is very different to what others have said. But about 20 years ago, I was in an IUCN commission workshop. I'm in a commission for education, communication, and in small brackets, participation. And the conclusion of that workshop was that the greatest threat to biodiversity conservation going forwards, leaving aside locked-in change like climate change and sea level rise, but the greatest threat, it is attitudes, values, and worldviews of conservationists. So I found that very challenging at that point because I hadn't long left English nature, and so I felt quite defensive about that. But I have to say, since then, I've facilitated about 140 dialogues at very local to global levels, and there is some truth in this. And that's because the worldview of conservationists comes with that scientism, and it does end up being scientism, not just science. It is almost a belief system that science should determine all outcomes, and then by that they only mean natural science, and that then decision making is linear, it's fragmented, it's siloed, it's reductionist. Understanding of how human brains actually make decisions. So this kind of equation of knowledge in rational analysis will get you to your wise decision. That's not how human brains even make decisions. So if we want to have evidence, if we want to do things in an evidence-based way, we need to be learning from the psychology and the neuroscience and the decision science, which is a whole new sort of sphere of research about how do human brains actually make decisions, so that when we're trying to enable wise decisions, we're working in the light of that, not in the old assumption that it's about massive amounts of data and knowledge and rational analysis. And then, of course, that also comes with a sort of a top-down, power-based perspective. And in participation world, the language has shifted over the last 20 years from participation, which implied that people were being able to participate, have some significant influence in the decisions, or actually be making the decisions together, to engagement, which has come to mean it's regarded as an encompassing language, but actually what you see happen is that the power stays within the usual groups that held power before, and lots of activity is done to inform or educate or connect people to a project or a strategy or whatever, but they're not being offered any shift in, there's no real shift in power. And I'm part of this global or international group looking at the effect of sharing power through effective participation on biodiversity and socially just outcomes, including for the beyond human. And the evidence is one of the researchers involved in that. He's done one with the same question, only on environmental rather than specifically biodiversity outcomes. The evidence is there. If you share power, you get better outputs and outcomes. But there's an inherent resistance in many of the agencies and organisations at all levels, so local through to internet to global, about this notion of sharing power with others to shape and influence futures. And misunderstandings about human brains even make decisions. And I think those are some significant barriers.
I have a sort of a similar story with that, Diana. I've just come back from a year over in Australia, and I was working with the New South Wales government with the marine park planners for their climate risk understanding and sort of developing adaptation toolkits for the planners themselves. But something they really value is speaking with those, I suppose, on the ground, and that's where one of my main barriers, I would say, is that communication at all levels, because as you guys have just discussed, there's barriers at every level, but sometimes those barriers can be easily overcome with that communication link, which I think is missing in a lot of areas. But I was lucky to see a very positive communication link between the government, between senior planners, between local businesses, the local cultural communities, and so basically at every level. And I think that it's another thing that you were talking about, sciencism. is a huge problem with those that have that knowledge, the academics. Being able to communicate that at those different levels is definitely a barrier that they predicted. So something that we did to overcome that was a weeks-long workshop, putting these different levels and different people to discuss their barriers and discuss their issues and concerns with people at all different levels. So the workshops moved around a lot. And basically out of it, we got several themes, some of which could be quite easily overcome. So it's definitely something I've seen in practice. But it was very good to see that they already predicted that was to be a barrier for them to be able to implement any adaptation sort of interventions in future. So it's actually really good to see a sort of positive outlook to a barrier.
I don't know if anyone's sorry, I'm coming at this a bit cold, but I mean, I before you said that, Kelly, I just written down the word communication, and then you went communication, and then I was like, yeah, there you go, my work here is done. But I guess the key thing we need to consider is what exactly we are communicating as well, because it's different to so many different people, and it can be quite overwhelming to know what to communicate to who, and I think we often go into these projects and think, right, all I have to do is communicate properly up front, and then I've got the green light and I just go ahead and I do my thing. But I think that's probably a massive problem, because what we then do is sort of take our foot off the communication pedal, because you need to be communicating the whole time for these projects. And I think, well, I mean, I sort of got involved in a sort of an issue yesterday on Cornish radio with someone who wanted to put in a seaweed farm, and they wanted some commentary on the uses of seaweeds. And I found myself embroiled in this really sort of passionate community that I knew nothing about, like their issues. All I knew was, I was coming out from a seaweed perspective. These things are great, and then they were telling me all of their problems. I'm like, oh, hang on, these aren't even real problems. But it's that sort of communication and lack of understanding what is really important to people. And I then sort of, after the radio show, I really should have prepared before, really. Then I was finding that people were worried about the impact on whales and dolphins and things, which and I was thinking, if the people who put forward this seaweed farm had communicated this up front, and the ability to, I guess, monitor, because when we say conserve and restoration, you've got to monitor that to show that you are conserving or restoring or improving something. And I think that's a real challenge to people, is to sort of convey that impact of what you're doing. And we live in a world now where we can sort of monitor everything to the nth degree in our sort of social lives and in the terrestrial environment. But in the marine world, it's really difficult to provide anything useful and tangible to these different stakeholders, and they all want different things as well. So I don't know if that's helpful comments or just overwhelming comments, because I think for me that's one of the major barriers, is working out what data we need when, and as you generate new data, how to put that out there so that people understand the efforts that you're going to and the impact that it's having. Not just on the environment, but potentially on them as well, and their kids and the people who will come after us. So it's that that's a big barrier, I think.
Can I just, I will shut up because I know other people haven't spoken, but I just think I'd just encourage to think that it's not about unilateral communication. It's about dialogue. It's about two-way communication. It's about co-creating new futures, and then looking to how you resolve both the opportunities and the challenges by both co-creating what that future looks like and plans about what that looks like, and then co-delivering. And that's what I mean by shifting power from sort of the experts know best, or the scientists know best, or the policymakers know best, but or even like one element internationally to sort of bring in Joanna's world, that you see the fragmentation. It's a complete accident of history that climate and the Biodiversity Convention were separated, into two different things, and then climate got tons and tons and tons of money and became quite sort of the thing to be involved in, but biodiversity got sort of left by the wayside, when actually it's a system. It's a very integrated system, and if we'd taken a systems approach back in when those two conventions sort of separated their ways, or that happened, I think we would be further along in the sort of resilience and restoration piece around both nature and the climate, integrated nature, climate, human social justice sort of crisis. So I think it's not just, and in terms of data, we found in the dialogue process we've done that if you go into a dialogue, and this is like we've done this with global water futures or some work on global climate change, that if you go into those sort of with this is the data, then you get instant pushback about like, well, who decided that was the most important data, and who were you to tell me it's only that data, and what about my data? And so even with data, there's a need to sort of co-create and discuss what's important and how are we going to access that. So we're doing something on global water futures. So I know this is not marine, it was water, but an Austrian-based global, but based in Austria organization set up some scenarios. So this is long-term scenario planning for global water futures. And they got instant pushback from countries that said, well, that's coming at us with a sort of westernized paradigm of values about what's important, about how you're framing it and all the rest of it. So even though there were rigorous science done to inform those scenarios, and economics and not social, economic, natural science, they got instant pushback. And it's the same at whatever level. If you impose things on others, there's all sorts of psychological reasons, which I won't go into now, but of why you trigger that response. But you do, and then it means that something that could be incredibly useful gets pushed back at and becomes not usable because others have not accepted it. So I think there's something, whatever level you're working at, about working collaboratively and co-creatively to co-create futures.
May I add something?
Please.
So I'm actually at the minute in New Orleans at the Ocean Science Conference. So I'm surrounded by scientists looking at all of these topics very, very much so. But just pulling back a little bit, I'm now sort of director of the Global Ocean Observing System, and that is essentially setting the essential ocean variable standards for what needs to be measured in the ocean. So there are set variables identified by the international community for what needs to be measured in the ocean. It's worth also thinking, and I think we need to separate what can be done in national waters and what needs to be done beyond national jurisdiction, because those are two very different political spaces. What's measured in national waters has to be organized at the national level. I think most people on this call are in the UK. So the UK has to decide for itself what it does in its own national waters, and then hopefully feed that into the international data delivery system. Now, I'm working very closely with colleagues here, looking not just at what those essential ocean variables are, but how we can build up the conversation around, this framework for data delivery into these national systems. Some, like the UK, are doing it more than other countries, but we have to look at. But I think biodiversity as a variable for measurement, eDNA and other things are way behind what's being measured as far as the physical and even the chemical nature of the ocean. So that's a first sort of thing to think about. We don't have enough data, as Mike was saying, and then you have to think, okay, well, how do we set those frameworks? I mean, one of the things that I'm discussing a lot with colleagues at the minute is there a way that we can build guidelines for nations to look at what should be collected, which is not easy, as well as where we actually put the instruments in the water, or that's also a challenge. Measuring the ocean is a very different concept to measuring anything on land, because of the very nature of the ocean. It's not just surface as well, it's up to miles deep in places. So that is also something that I don't think is in people's consciousnesses. So we have to look at how, perhaps on an international level, one of the things I'm discussing at the minute is how can we help these develop guidelines for all countries to understand what they need to measure and what instrumentation is needed to do that, bearing in mind, of course, we know that technology is moving extremely fast. And then the third point is, of course, the data delivery. What then is coming out of these instruments, whether they come from ships, from buoys, from moorings, whatever, that are then provided along this value chain that Mike was alluding to not just data, but data products that can then be used in decision making. And what are the priorities there? I mean, from anything like sea level to eDNA to macroalgae concentrations or whatever. And then that you're going also into have to have this basis, scientific basis. I strongly believe in that, because otherwise we're going to have people jumping on, when we get back to the climate conversation, you know, the MCDR bandwagon and selling carbon credits or whatever without any scientific basis whatsoever, which is extremely dangerous, because the IPCC tells us that, you know, the maximum you can get in terms of mitigation potential globally from biodiversity is less than 1.5%. So you're going to be starting using, you know, excuses as far as the ocean is concerned, because it is out of sight, out of mind, to do things that really need a lot stronger, let's say, even a global governance, which we're not even closely near that right now as far as biodiversity protection is concerned. So I agree that, you know, the biodiversity and climate conversations were separated at the Rio Conventions, but actually the ocean hasn't been in either conversations. So it's not that. I don't think that's the problem. I think we need to just evolve this consciousness a lot further between the ocean and bringing that into every political conversation, but really understanding what the accounting capabilities are in terms of ocean biodiversity into that. And then beyond national jurisdiction, the biodiversity beyond BBNJ, sorry, it also needs very strong observation support in order to make decision making. The IOC is cited in that conversation, and I think we need to look at that. One of the things I'm challenged with, sorry, I'm going on a little bit, but I think one of the things I'm challenged with very much is there is a lack of consciousness at the political level and lack of investment, as everyone I think knows, in even getting the basic data that those conventions like WMO, for example, the National Meteorological Hydrological Services that are taking, you know, atmospheric measurements are mandated to do. That's not the case in the ocean. So we're trying constantly to even get across the value of these measurements as a basis for even for early warning systems and weather, never mind for biodiversity accounting. So I think we are very early in this conversation, and we need to look at how we can, you know, move as fast as possible, considering the massive implications that it has if we don't move fast in that space. So I hope that helps. I'll stop now, but pass back to Emily.
Thank you all. That was incredibly insightful. I think I heard a lot about all of the different who's. So, you know, all the levels of who is or maybe isn't involved in these conversations. You know, one of the questions that Joe had kindly given me for today was to think about who are the key stakeholders, obviously the term that we use kind of in our bubble, who are the key stakeholders that need to be involved to drive marine conservation and restoration forward. And listening to that fantastic discussion is, you know, there are, you know, increasingly more people aware, engaged, involved, see this as something that is their responsibility. I heard a lot of not just who is involved, but how they need to be involved, and when we engage, you know, how that kind of two-way dialogue, as Diana called it. You know, I think in my career, it's very much felt like when we started, we thought about communicating and engagement as being this sort of announcement, almost like a fire hose into the void. We're doing this, here's some information, join in if you'd like. And over time, we're getting better at understanding that, you know, there isn't this we know, you follow mindset. That's not going to fix anything. That is, you know, not the way that certainly I want to practice marine conservation and restoration. But who do you feel is missing from these from our practice of marine conservation and restoration, who needs to be involved for us to be able to sort of break down some of those barriers that we've already touched on. If anybody'd like to come in.
So I'll make a comment on that if you like. I mean, it's
yeah.
I think it's different in the marine world though. So I mean, when you say who needs to be involved in the stakeholder things, it's really easy in the terrestrial environment because we have lovely boundaries, and you know everyone loves their fields and their land and their space, and they say this is mine. The problem with the marine world, with the opportunity with the marine world, is no one really owns it. You know, we have our little territorial waters and things like that, but they all sort of blur into one. The water's moving around. So you do something somewhere, somebody else might get the benefit of it. And you can't control that. And you think, well, that's a great thing. In reality, that's a great thing. But in practice, that's actually a very difficult thing for people to invest in, because they might not, you know, it's why we're, you know, with carbon dioxide removal and all these technologies, you know, you might remove an absolute shed load in America, say, and people around the world aren't removing any carbon, and they get the benefit. And that's a terrible thing, isn't it, if the Americans have to pay for it? But and I think that's the problem with the ocean space as well, is when you do these sort of conservation and restoration projects, the benefits kind of, you know, you put the impact in a local area, but the benefits are huge. They're spread out everywhere, and because of that, it's less tractionable. And I think, you know, what I've seen in the last couple of years since I sort of moved into this space, I think there are groups of forward-thinking countries that are getting involved in this. I mean, I've been really impressed with the AOSIS nations. You know, I don't know whether that's because, you know, they're ahead of the curve in their thinking of these projects because they have to be, because they're going to feel the brunt of climate change. So they're like, right, hang on, the big super countries and the powerhouses of the world aren't helping us. We're going to have to go and take the fight to them here. And I think, you know, it's a case where I think we have to get behind the smaller island nations and let them lead and let them dictate the narrative, because they're the ones that are going to be far more impacted than you know, the bigger, more developed countries. So, you know, I just wanted to throw that out there, is that maybe we start listening to the people who are most vulnerable and what their concerns are, rather than trying to tell people what our concerns are. I don't know if that's controversial or common sense, but I'd be welcome to hear what you think of that.
I agree with you. I mean, the AOSIS nations are completely ahead of the curve with these conversations by the very nature of who they are and how they're affected, and the fact that they are large ocean states, so not small island nations. So yeah, they have a lot of the answers. I'm sure Emily knows this as well from her work, and really should be consulted when we're thinking about how to manage the space, and not thought of the victims of many of the situations that they're landed in. But that is and they have a very small voice in international negotiations, unfortunately, even though they have a wealth of experience that should be drawn on.
Just to come in.
Oh, so you go.
Oh, sorry, Dan. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think what Mike has said and Joanna said is spot on, really. And I think just to add another flavour, obviously the key groups, individuals are, you know, all the users of the marine environment, whether it's industry, you know, fishers. We talk about fishers a lot. Very often these are individual businesses, individual skippers. You know, they're people basically. And then you've got NGOs and government. But I think, you know, just had a different flavour. I think local communities are critical to this, because, you know, conservation can happen on very large scale. You know, huge, hundreds of thousands worth of square kilometres of MPAs, let's say. But also, you know, people trying to protect their, you know, outside their back door, or, you know, restoring some, I don't know, a seagrass patch that's, you know, tiny in a pinprick when you look at it on a global map sort of thing. But you add all of that up, you add all of those individuals up, and all of those individuals are voters at the end of the day, and all of those run businesses, or they work, or they pay taxes. You know, it's so critical, I think, to engage local communities at the beach. Hard work, because it takes a lot more effort than just, talking to a government or talking to a trade body or something like that. But I think that's really critical to get that mass buy-in right across the globe, really.
Yeah, just to come in on a lot of the work I've been doing over the last year is thinking about kind of where that responsibility for ocean care, ocean action, however you want to term it, lies. And so I've been doing a lot of work with inland communities in England, in the Midlands, and kind of that we as practitioners understand that no matter where you live, you impact and are impacted by the ocean. It's a fundamental principle of ocean literacy. But actually, we talk a lot at the beginning of this conversation about kind of awareness and inertia, I think you called it, David. And so I think there is this kind of almost disconnect of who's involved in the conversation, who feels they can be involved in the conversation, and actually that gap between people understanding that they are an ocean actor, but they just perhaps don't understand how they can engage in what we do. And so a lot of my work has been that no matter where you live, so I've been working in Nottingham, for example, actually a lot of the things we do in Nottingham can have as much of an impact as if I was to act on the coast, because that's the end of the line rather than the start of the line. So sort of, sorry, stepping out of my chair role, putting my chair hat back on, but actually there is, where do we draw that line, and where and is it up to us to decide who should be involved, I guess, in those conversations, and how we kind of create the space for people to self-select. So yeah, kind of going back to the barriers. But Diana, I know you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I was sort of going with one of the questions that was in the brief that you brought, which was about systems approaches. And if you are taking a systems approach, then everything is all completely connected. It is all one system. But to conceive of sort of effective management or effective change, then you've got to start saying, okay, in this particular context, where are we drawing our boundary around our system? And if whether that's globally, sort of ocean areas, or whatever area you're drawing a boundary around, then it's who is holding power in for that system to influence change at that system level. And then once you start thinking a systems approach, then the way you want to identify people who are in the group, who are holding power and deliberating and ensuring it's more just and inclusive, is, well, who's got knowledge about the different parts of the system? So I think some of the approaches to the who is sort of done by sector or by people, users, or their regulators, or their whatever kind of role they have. But ultimately, wisest decisions and systems knowledge builds from that huge diversity of knowledges and perspectives coming together to understand the system. And if we put this intervention into the system at this point, what are the virtuous or negative effects on the wider system? So, and it's looking for the patterns, and it's looking for the feedback loops, and it's looking for the incremental change patterns and all the rest of it. So I think once you start thinking about, as I say, I absolutely understand everything as a system, but that we manage bits of the systems as well, whether that, whatever governance scale that's at. But once you start saying, okay, we're operating at this scale, it begins to sort of become much clearer about, well, then the who then. And then in terms of involved, it just always begs the question for me, when you say involved, what do you mean by involved? Where's the power in that? Because we've done quite a bit of research over the years, and if projects are involving others, but when you ask who is making the decisions and who is holding the resources and the funds to implement the decisions, and I did say this at Coastal Futures, David, so if you were there, you'll have heard me say this, but nearly always it is male, it is educated, often educated in westernized ways, with a degree of affluence. So we've got very limited, and often environmentalists with a few hangers-on, are actually making the decisions about what needs to happen in a space, and then they try and persuade everybody they're right through all sorts of involvement and engagement activities, and then go on and hold the resources and the mandate and well, not necessarily the mandate, but the resources, and hold the power to implement that decision. And so actually nothing much has changed. You've involved gazillions of people potentially in a whole variety of ways, but in terms of where power sits and who's making the decisions and the values and knowledges influencing those decisions, it's not very inclusive at all. So it's kind of like systems approach, multiple forms of knowledge, not just environmental evidence and science and ways of knowing about things, but multiple others, and thereby it starts becoming clearer who then.
Thank you. That was incredibly insightful. I guess that leads well into the question that you already started to answer, Diana, which is, what role do systems approaches have in supporting marine conservation and restoration? So I'll open that out to other experts.
I can start, and I'm going to say we very much, well, I've done anything differently, but we after chatting earlier, but we look at the natural capital approach is very much a focus of the DEFRA at the moment, and there's a natural capital ecosystem assessment program that is helping us to particularly focus on improving our evidence in the marine environment and trying to better understand that kind of that approach to, rather than maybe the focus on biodiversity that has been on the past. Whilst there are flaws and it may not be a concept that fits everything, that the program is at the moment is helping us kind of at least definitely build up our evidence base around some of the ecosystem services, things that we don't really know that much about how fast can a salt marsh remove nutrients from the environment in order to better understand how salt marshes can improve our water quality, and restoring salt marshes can improve our water quality or our carbon sequestration rates or our flood defense benefits, and trying to then piece them all together and basically improve the management of our estuaries and coasts as a whole through that piecing them all together, building them into models and systems and things that we can then use to inform water companies or inform management and agriculture, and to try and enhance, bring our water bodies back into good ecological status. So it's a approach that we at the moment I think is really useful in trying to provide lots of key evidence, and hopefully it can take it forward and try and use it to deliver management and change in the future.
Just to add, I think to add to that, I mean, I think I agree with everything Ben said, really. And I think obviously, the way that we've talked about already, the way the ocean doesn't recognize or respect boundaries, the fact that it's no good really having targets for marine protection and then allowing destructive practices to take place. It's no good having policies in one area such as energy or food production which conflict with nature, climate and environmental policies. So the issues we are talking about in marine protection or marine restoration are clearly systemic ones. You think about the way we use and consume and then dispose of plastics, the way we choose our seafood and our fish. They're clearly interrelated and have huge interactions, really. So, I think, and going back to something we said earlier, building that ocean literacy, I think, is key to building capacity in our institutions and agencies, so they understand that interconnectedness, that systemic change needs to happen rather than singular topics or policies, which often as environmentalists or as scientists or as regulators, we often do. We got our bit and we look after it and we do it, and that's great. But I think the ocean just lends itself to systems thinking incredibly so.
Anybody else on systems approaches?
I would say that so WMO are certainly taking a systems approach now to their work, and this is coming much more to the fore at the multilateral level. From the IOC perspective, there is a move now by member states to look at how we can evolve climate resilient marine spatial planning or sustainable ocean planning, or whatever words you want to use. So that is coming very much into the political conversations, but again, very early stages. The high level panel for a sustainable ocean economy looked at this a couple of years ago. They had a transformation document that was actually quite exciting and positive, and these countries were really looking at how they can look at 100% sustainably managed EEZs. But I think they've not done what they said they would do, and are still sort of now for me, took a step back and carried on producing scientific papers rather than actually building on the action that they'd identified themselves as needing to do. So there are conversations about it. I think it is moving forward, but it is, as you said, David, an extremely complicated conversation, because we have to look at everything that's happening in the marine space. That is, and we know that it's not just that; it's about the changes happening due to climate. These temperatures of the oceans this year are scary, to say the least. And then we look at sort of the blue economy. I would say the Australia has done some good work. To say Australia's done some good work in identifying the value of its blue economy and casting that back on a sort of push towards the needs around ocean observations and data needs in their waters, showing the cost benefit of that work in the context of the blue economy. And for them, that includes sort of blue ecosystem. So there are some evidence of it at a national level that it is coming along, but there's again a little bit of a huge work to be done, I think, in that space, looking at how we account for natural ecosystems and how we manage that in a sort of climate resilient, spatially planned way, with all of these different contexts going on in the shore. So yeah.
I just want to sort of add to some stuff that's been said. So I absolutely see the place for natural capital approach in certain contexts, and with wisdom about how it frames knowledge and uses knowledge and what it does to knowledge in the process. There is a global pushback on natural capitalist approach now, because the IPCC, the IPBES report did a report on values, I think about 18 months, a bit more, July, a bit ago. And this notion that the ecosystem services natural capital approach type thinking is quite a westernized, colonial, nature at our service, extracting benefits and services from. I'm not saying I agree with all of this, but this is how it's seen. Paradigm. And that they've got the report that talks about living from, which is natural capital ecosystem services type thinking, living with, living in, and living as. And some Indigenous people have pushed back and say we're not even living as nature, we are nature. And if Westernized people understood they were nature and not somehow separate from nature, we would be in a lot less mess. So I absolutely see the value of working out, the relative merit of restoring a particular habitat versus, to use a coastal UK example, to use mudflats and seagrass beds as sort of reducing sort of wave impact on the land versus concrete. Of course, you need to start looking at cost benefit analysis. If you're trying to motivate the treasury of any country, of course they need to understand. But effectively, that is an econocentric and anthropocentric worldview. It is about the economics of things, the economics, the way we value things changes over time, and it can end up with some quite perverse incentives. And I just think that the approach has been adopted a bit uncritically with some of how it affects the way we frame and see. And we facilitated something, for example, where maybe 15 years ago, it was a wind farm versus a conservation argument, and the conservationists were using intrinsic values, and the wind farm were using economic benefits of putting in the wind farm. And some years later, once the natural capital ecosystem services approach had sort of percolated and been adopted, we were facilitating a similar dialogue, and the wind farm were using the intrinsic values about the future of humanity, about future generations, about the need to sort of do things in as renewable a way as possible. So they're using intrinsic motivations, and the conservationists had switched to the sort of numeric economic valuations perspective. And that again comes back to understanding how decisions are made, that if I think you've got a power base I don't want to fight you on, I'll switch my power base. And so in the negotiation, who was using the moral intrinsic and who was using the the extrinsic numbers and benefits switch, and because in some way those two organisations thought that was going to best advance, or those two perspectives thought that would best advantage their argument and their case. So I absolutely see the place for it. But it seems to me it's not inherently a systems approach, because it seems to look at the components in a system and then try and sum them, rather than look at the system and look at the patterns in the system and the feedback loops in the system and focus on that, and then be informed by what we know about the components. But the main focus is the system as a whole. So I absolutely do see its place, Ben, but just not as a panacea for all decision making in all settings all the time, which is, I know how some advocates do see it. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that.
Useful, thank you.
Anybody else on systems approaches? No. Okay, I think that, you know, there's obviously this. I guess my question back is, how do we as the practitioners have a role in advocating for a systems approach? We've talked a lot about the benefits of taking a systems approach, and what might that role be? How can we be the ones? Because I think it's easy to say it's not happening, it needs to happen, but how can we be the ones that encourage that to happen? Any thoughts on that?
I think it's I got some thoughts. I haven't got the answers, I think, Emily, really. I think it's a difficult one. You're right, it's easy to say we need to think more systemically and think more about systems. But how does one do that? I mean, I think it's important for those who do understand systems to really kind of push it. I think it's important for those in institutions and government who you know, get out of their silos and realize that this is cross-sectoral, cross-community, cross-population, cross, you know, international boundaries issue, and really push and promote that. I mean, I think some of the large international conventions and dialogues that are happening at the moment, you know, around, you know, high seas BB&J treaties, you know, talk about the World Trade Organization fisheries subsidies discussions, you know, deep sea mining. I think all of these things are very systemic in their nature, because not only are they geographically, you know, cross many boundaries, the issues in them, whether it's, you know, modern slavery, whether it's around you know, environmental protection, are just more than just a single sector. So, you know, I'm not really coming up with an answer for you really, but I think it's those institutions in some ways that are already cross sector and cross geography really need to help that. Yeah, I mean, I haven't got a simple answer, sorry.
So I've got an answer. Sorry, I have some thoughts on so much. It's also, I spend so much of my life being a neutral facilitator, not allowed to have an opinion on anything. So when I'm allowed to have an opinion, I have it. So at least in the UK and further afield, I know, but certainly know more about the UK. So a year before, we were working with a chief scientist, system science team, and he had a team that was looking across all DAFRA, the department, for the not UK people, that's the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. Yeah, in the UK, and it was looking across all the different things that organisation, that the government is responsible for, and then looking at how you could take system approaches in them and linked across them and so on. And we did some work with them about how do you apply those systems thinking approaches in practice. They have now produced some bunch of guidance. So if anybody wants to understand more about what systems thinking is as a sort of mode of practice, then there's some guidance you can actually find on that website. And then how do you do it? Well, we design it into the way we do dialogue, so that we're inviting people. We're doing something in India in a week and a bit, and we'll be inviting people to do some systems mapping, causal diagrams, rich pictures, there's techniques that help people start seeing the system, only partially, of course, ever, but start understanding things as connections and links and patterns and systems, rather than bits and pieces that we try and add together. So there's methods, there's techniques, there's philosophies, there's ways of doing it using technology, but I have doubts about I think from a research perspective, that's all incredibly fascinating and interesting, but from the pragmatics of fast decision making, I think actually soft systems approaches deliver more, quicker and better. So yeah, I mean, that's how you do it. There's well-proven methods, and what we just need is to see that kind of thinking commissioned and understood and wanted more, and we advocate for that wherever we come across it, and have done for about 20 years. So I don't know, it's a body of research developing very fast, body of practice developing very fast.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of take us completely in a different direction, just conscious of time. I want to ask what role innovation and technology has to play in marine conservation and restoration, sort of taking us away from the kind of dialogue side of things. Does anybody want to come in first on this one?
I don't mind chatting a bit about this, because this is kind of a subject close to my heart, to be honest. We found that, so to give you a bit of background on Seaweed Generation, the company I co-founded, we sort of launched about 2.5 years ago with carbon dioxide removal and in mind, dealing with the problematic sargassum across the Caribbean, and basically sink it into the deep ocean. And I mean, the carbon market's all over the place, and whatever your opinions are on that, guys, I mean, oh my word, I've heard them all. But what we realized very quickly was that we needed to build out not just the technology for removing the carbon, but for monitoring the environment to go with that. And that was a case of monitoring the surface ocean, where we were active, monitoring the deep ocean, where we'd be putting the seaweed, and everything in between, as well as the coastal systems where the seaweed would be removed from. There's no point doing it and saying, look, we're helping the coast out. We're not seeing and measuring impact on the coast. And what we found is that, you know, we had our one robot in mind when we first set up. Now we've got like 5 or 6 robots, and they're all about monitoring the environment. And what we're finding is that we're getting far more interest from people for our monitoring activities than we are the seaweed sinking. So we're sort of in the process of pivoting away from actual direct climate change mitigation action towards environmental monitoring, because that's what people seem to be very passionate about. And one of the things we found is that everyone who was looking to monitor the marine environment, especially the deep ocean, is so bloody expensive. You know, like people like quote you tens of millions of pounds to put a probe down and go down 4,000 meters. You know, I remember like last year I had a discussion internally in the company, and we were talking about how to portray how difficult it is to go down 4,000 meters and monitor the seabed. And then that billionaire went down in that submarine and got himself crushed. And all of a sudden, I mean, that was awful for those guys, but actually people became very much aware of how far away 4 kilometers is from the surface. It's not like walking 4 kilometers. Going down with, you know, to have 4 kilometers of water on top of your head. I mean, that's horrifying and terrifying. And the only way we can really access that environment at the moment is with big ass boats, with big ass cranes and big ass equipment, hauling it up and down and things. And if we're going to actually access these environments effectively, and not just at pinpoint locations where we have the, you know, rich enough resources to do that, we have to have innovative technologies that are small, cheap, dynamic, and have the resolution that we need to understand the globe. So it's not just going to be big boats and big equipment. It's going to be small little probes, in and out, quick, you know, doing what they can. And what we're finding is that that message is actually resonating with people. People are actually starting to come around. And I mean, whatever you think about Ocean's Gate and their safety, they actually had the right idea in terms of being scrappy and going down into the deep sea. What they shouldn't have done is taken humans down with them. But their approach of using PlayStation controllers and that sort of technology was probably correct. It's just their big mistake was cutting corners on safety when they had humans in there. But if you were not physically going down, I mean, this is perfect for robots, and you know, that's what we sort of really need to unlock. And we have all these technologies. I mean, Christ, we can send rockets into space. I mean, we can send probes down 4 or 5 miles in the ocean. You know, we just need to sort of make it available at a cost-effective price. So that's where I think there's loads of scope for innovation. There's a lot of these technologies we already have.
I think just to pick up on what Mike's saying, I think there's a huge value now in developing autonomous vehicles for ocean observations. That's clear, and also for machine-to-machine learning. So you're delivering the information directly without having somebody, I don't know, read through PDF files or automatically look at, is that information updated? I think the challenge actually, which I'm dealing with, is how do we set standardization of that and recommendations and then, you know, you're talking about sort of environmental monitoring in a local scale. How do we then sort of set the standards so everybody who's doing any monitoring can reach a certain level of standardization that can then feed into an international system? I'm not saying there's one. We'll have to use a federated system for looking at data or cloud or whatever methods are there for data sharing. But to have a standardized situation for taking measurements to a certain standard and for delivering data in through machines to that can be then used for this sort of level of measuring is extremely important. And so then I think the only way to do this is to sort of look at how this can be identified at a global level that can then be a framework in which everyone can moderate. It's one of the things I'm personally looking at. It's a massive challenge. There's a lot of I've spent, you know, here and looking at a lot of machines going down, and there's a lot of there's certain networks operating, some are autonomous, some not, and there's, you know, massive challenges with taking ocean measurements shouldn't be underestimated. But I think that certainly there's people now looking at eDNA measurements and how best to do that from anything from I was chatting with Deutsche Bank last week. They're funding the German racing team to take eDNA measurements in coastal waters to you know, work going on really, you know, putting sensors on animals to other sensors, you know, looking at how we can strengthen the Argo network for biogeochemistry measurements. So there's a lot of work, but it needs to be set within a global framework of standards, and that is, you know, is a challenge in and of itself. And then people like Mike who are taking measurements in UK waters can know where to send that information as well. So that's also a huge challenge. And then, you know, the involvement of what are the data products or indicators that we need then to sort of like make those decisions at all levels, and involving from community to government. So I think there's different sort of layers of conversation within that, and, you know, including sort of knowledge that's sort of at the community and indigenous knowledge level as well within the decision making once you have that sort of information. So yeah, not an easy question and not an easy answer. I think it's the short version.
I was just going to add something from a restoration point of view as well. So, well, I saw the Environment Agency and the University of Portsmouth and the Zoological Society of London we published a seagrass restoration handbook in 2021, and already it's in drastic need of an update because the changes in technology and restoration approaches in the last just 2 years, basically, since we last published it. And we're seeing research groups and NGOs have really jumped forward, developed lots of innovative techniques for restoration that weren't really considered or feasible a few years ago, and particularly looking abroad, looking at some of the work being done in other countries like seagrass restoration, or looking to Sweden, to the Netherlands, and to the United States as well. And I sort of spoke a bit earlier about scaling up and the aquaculture side of things, and in order to develop restoration at a large scale, the technology to go needs to go with it. And something like seagrass restoration. We looked at places that have been doing it for years and really innovative, large-scale techniques, places like Virginia and Delaware, where seagrass restoration is carried out on a huge scale using mechanized approaches, not even that complex technology, but innovative mechanized approaches that allow it to be delivered in scale we can't dream of in the United Kingdom, but we really want to achieve. And groups like Project Seagrass at the University of Swansea and things are looking to work towards that. So yeah, it really is key for the innovation is key for restoration.
Thank you all. Conscious of us coming to the end of our time. So to finish us off, I'm going to ask everybody if they just give a very brief thought on what is the key action or strategy that you think should be prioritised in order for us to achieve a sustainable and healthy ocean for future generations. It's not a big topic for your last question. Who'd like to go first?
I will start because I have to leave, unfortunately, for another meeting in about 2 minutes. So, from my previous positions at climate change and from my current one heading up the Global Ocean Observing System, I would say that we need commitment by countries for a climate resilient, marine, spatially planned global ocean, and that needs to be based on a trusted, observed, and researched ocean that really can provide the information needed for that decision making, and that countries agree to and meet their commitments that they have to these global agreements. So I can say a lot more, but I'll stop there. Thanks everybody, and apologies I have to actually leave. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll jump in next, really. I suppose without picking on too many things, because you could go on and on, couldn't you, as you say, Emily? I think for me, two things. One is ensuring that the MPAs, the marine protected areas we have, are well managed, properly enforced and well managed. I think is really important, and some of those are highly protected or fully protected. And then from a restoration point of view, I think it's just great commitment from across society, really, that this is something that needs to happen. It's very expensive, it's difficult, it's not always successful. But I think, as Ben said earlier, one has to intervene. These habitats and species are so degraded that there's no other way. So I think just across government, community governance, and institutions commitment to restore the oceans.
Yeah, I have to follow up that. I would say funding, from my view, funding is key. It's whether it be public sector, private sector, where a funding mechanism that can be put in place to provide that confidence for investment in large-scale restoration strategies.
Mike, did you want to go next?
Oh God, it's hard to come up with something short and sharp after those three. I guess building on what David said, actually, it's kind of getting everyone on board, getting people to really value their oceans, and not just the ocean that's space that's on their doorstep, but all of the ocean, and understand that everything is so connected. So that's the thing that really I think is, so that when I know that I'm conserving and restoring my environment here on my local beach, I know that it's going to have an impact thousands and thousands of miles away. Like that butterfly flapping its wings and causing a hurricane. I think that's what we need in the restoration spaces. Everyone doing their bit and not just thinking about my little zone. It's like the 70% is what we want to be targeting, not just the tiny little areas. That's a really difficult thing to communicate. As I just garbled out.
And Kelly or Diana?
Yeah, I can go. Like you said, Emily, firstly, thank you so much for hosting as well. But on your last question, I think everyone's hit some really, really good points. And like you said, it's not a very easy question to answer. But I would say, kind of touching on Mike's point as well, we seem to be consecutively doing this. But that's sort of getting the right people in the room, and learning from our mistakes. you know, I think as a species we have a tendency to just to kind of brush it under the carpet, just like let's move on, but let's learn from it. You know, if something's not gone the way that we wanted to in terms of restoration or conservation, it's okay. Let's learn from it. Let's get the right people in the room and see how we can improve or amend or start again. That's probably what I would say. That is what's going to help achieve those sustainable oceans that we're all aspiring to have.
Thank you. Diana?
As everybody says, tough question, Emily, for a punchy answer. I think, I mean, there's so many ways I could answer this, but I think I'm going to reflect back on something I said earlier, and that is that as much as education and awareness raising and everything needs to go externally beyond the environment sector, I think the environment sector needs to learn and shift rapidly towards sort of inclusive, open-minded systems approaches and away from the linear, rational, reductionist ways of coming in that sort of came in with the Enlightenment and realised actually that's no longer fit for purpose. I'm not sure it ever was, but it definitely isn't now that we have these highly complex systems. So I think it's sort of, we need to change our own cultures and mindsets to catalyse the speed of change that I think is needed.
Fantastic. Well, we've come to the end of our time today. I mean, I've certainly found it incredibly useful. Thank you all for your time, for sharing your insights, and also more broadly for the important work that you do. And thank you to IES for hosting today's session and to Jo for organising today. And that's, yeah, thank you all and bye for now.